The children called her Mama Grace. For 22 years, Grace Obed had been more mother to the Williams children than their actual mother ever was. Grace had arrived at the Williams estate in 1993, an 18-year-old village girl from Enugu who needed work. Mrs. Patricia Williams had just given birth to her first son, Michael, and needed help. "You'll come in the mornings and leave at night," Patricia had said, barely looking up from her magazine. "We don't pay much, but the work is steady. Take it or leave it." Grace had taken it. She'd sent most of her salary home to her grandmother in the village every month. She'd raised Michael from infancy, changed his diapers, walked him through his first steps, sang him to sleep while Patricia attended cocktail parties. 2 years later came a daughter, Emma, then Joshua 4 years after that. 3 children. Grace had raised all of them. She'd been there for Michael's first day of school while Patricia was at the spa. She'd nursed Emma through illness while Patricia slept with earplugs in. She taught Joshua to read. She'd braided Emma's hair for every school dance. Mr. Richard Williams, the shipping magnate father, was barely home, but when he was kind to Grace. "You're doing a good job with them," he'd tell her quietly, slipping her extra money. "Better than I could do." The children loved her. Michael called her his real mom once when he was 7, and Patricia had corrected him firmly. "I am your mother," Patricia had said. "That woman is the help." But the children never forgot Grace. When Emma graduated from university in London, the first person she called was Grace. When Joshua broke his arm, he cried for Mama Grace. When Grace turned 30, she married her longtime sweetheart, Chidi. By then, jobs were scarce and they couldn't afford much. They rented a small room in the same area as the Williams estate. Grace continued her work, arriving early each morning, caring for the Williams children all day, then going home to her own family at night. She gave birth to 2 children of her own, a daughter and a son. Every evening, she'd return to her small room, exhausted but grateful. She cooked for her own children, helped them with homework, and poured into them the same love she gave the Williams family. Grace was 40 now. Her back ached from 22 years of bending over laundry. Her hands were worn from cooking and cleaning, but she'd never complained. In January 2015, Mr. Richard Williams passed away from a heart attack. He was 56. The funeral was enormous. Politicians, business moguls, crowds of people who claimed to have loved him. Grace sat in the back row in her cleanest church dress. Nobody had invited her to sit with the family. After the burial, everyone returned to the estate. Grace served food and drinks just as she always had. Nobody thanked her. 3 days later, Barrister Emeka Okafor, the family lawyer, arrived at the Williams estate. The family gathered in the living room. Patricia sat prominently, already mentally spending her inheritance. Michael, Emma, and Joshua sat around her, all dressed in black, all looking expectant. Grace was in the kitchen, washing dishes from lunch. She could hear their voices through the doorway, but continued scrubbing plates, staying out of sight as she always did during family matters. Barrister Emeka opened his briefcase and pulled out the file. This will was updated 6 months ago. Mr. Williams was of sound mind. Everything was witnessed and notarized. Patricia waved impatiently. "Yes, yes, continue." Grace quietly dried her hands and began sweeping the hallway near the living room entrance, unnoticed as usual. Barrister Emeka began reading. "To my wife, Patricia Williams, I leave 50 million naira, our joint savings, and her jewelry." Patricia's face showed surprise.
What about the
50
house?
million?
The company?
What about the house? The company? "To my son, Michael Williams, I leave 20 million naira and my vintage car collection." 20 million? Father's estate is worth over 2 billion. "To my daughter, Emma Williams, I leave 20 million naira and the Lekki property." "To my son, Joshua Williams, I leave 20 million naira and my law book collection." Joshua looked up from his phone. "What about the shipping company?" Grace paused her sweeping, the broom frozen in her hands. Barrister Emeka looked up. The remainder of my estate, the family home, the shipping company, all properties, the investment portfolio, and all other assets, I leave to Miss Grace Chioma Obi. Silence. Then shock. Grace dropped the broom. It clattered against the marble floor. "The nanny?" exclaimed Patricia. "He left everything to the nanny?" All eyes turned to Grace standing in the hallway, her mouth open in disbelief.
"The nanny?
"We'll contest this," Michael said. "On what grounds?" Barrister Emeka asked calmly. "I have medical reports confirming your father's mental competency. Video evidence? This will is legally sound." "But why?" Emma asked. "He left a letter." Barrister Emeka read Richard Williams' final words. The letter revealed everything. Patricia's decade-long relationship with Richard's business partner, Chief Okonkwo. A DNA test proving that Emma wasn't Richard's biological daughter. She was Chief Okonkwo's child. The room went silent. Emma went pale. Patricia's hands trembled. Then came the bigger revelation. In 1975, 16-year-old Richard had gotten a village girl expecting, Chioma Obi. Frightened of his strict father, he'd run to Lagos and never looked back. 18 years later, he'd hired her daughter, Grace Obi, to care for his newborn. He hadn't made the connection immediately, but several years ago, something happened that changed everything. The letter explained. "One afternoon, I overheard Grace on the phone. Her grandmother had just died. She was crying, speaking to her mother about the funeral arrangements. She came to me afterward asking permission to go to the village for the burial. When I asked about her family, she mentioned names, her grandmother's name, her mother's name, the village. My blood ran cold. I recognized those names, that village, that woman I'd left behind all those years ago. I questioned her gently about her mother's history, pretending to be making conversation. The pieces fit together perfectly, the dates, the place, everything. But I needed to be certain. I secretly ordered a DNA test, took a sample from her water glass one day. When the results came back, I sat in my office and wept. Grace was my daughter. The baby I'd abandoned had grown up to raise my other children. Grace was his daughter. The baby he'd left behind had grown up to raise his other children. I received the DNA results confirming she was my daughter, the letter continued. I tried to tell her many times, but each time I gathered the courage, Patricia would walk in and I'd lose my nerve. I'd change the subject, make an excuse. Years passed, the secret became heavier, and now it's too late to tell her face to face. I never told her. I wasn't brave enough. I watched her give everything while I stayed silent, watching her raise my legitimate children while living in a small rented room with her own family. I'm leaving her everything, not as payment, but as her birthright. She's my firstborn daughter. Richard explained each inheritance. Patricia got money despite her actions. The children got smaller amounts because they'd treated Grace poorly. Emma wasn't his biological child, but he'd raised her. Michael and Joshua were his sons, but they'd learned poor values. Grace earned everything. She raised my children, ran my household, gave everything while asking nothing, and she's my daughter. The letter ended with a note. Contest the will, and Patricia's relationship and Emma's true parentage becomes public record. Grace is now one of the wealthiest women in Lagos, Barrister Emeka said. The will stands. Grace stood frozen in the hallway, tears streaming down her face. 22 years of servitude, and her father had known. Later that evening, after the family had left in shock and anger, Barrister Emeka found Grace still standing in the same spot. He showed her the DNA test, explained everything in detail. She cried. 22 years of servitude, and her father had known. "What happens now?" she whispered.
Trust me.
"Everything is yours," he said.
We'll face it together.
That evening, Grace went home to her small rented room and told her husband and children. They held each other and cried, tears of joy and pain. 1 year later, Grace sat on the veranda of the Williams estate, no longer a servant, but the owner. Her own children attended the best schools. Her husband had retired. The moral: the people you overlook might be holding your world together. Treat everyone with dignity.